Thanks, Malcolm and Scott, and even though Jane Silver is not here, I'd like to thank Jane for her strong leadership along with Scott on the event committee for tonight. Tonight, as said before, is a record event, and that's really great for TAG, and TAG has had 2 years in a row where we've been able to add 2 new staff each year, and I just want to thank you all for making that possible. Last year we added Sue Perez, our Federal Policy Director, and Claire Wingfield, our TB HIV Coordinator, and this year in the winter we added Lee Chow, our Hepatitis HIV Coordinator, and this fall we were very lucky to add Scott Morgan as our first ever Deputy Director who's helping me and the board to run the organization. And it's because of you that we're able to grow and be bigger than we ever have as we enter this extremely challenging, promising, and fragile moment in the history of the world response to the AIDS epidemic. Now, why do I say it's a fragile moment? You are all aware of the collapsing economy, the political situation, the gory bombings and the horrible wars which rage all over the world. And I'm sure that many of you have been grievously affected by the recent economic crash, and so your generosity means extra to us this year because we know how much further you're having to reach in order to support us, and that really means a lot to us, and it's a testimony to how much you believe in the essential nature of the fight against AIDS. But I also believe that it's an incredibly promising moment. It may be the most promising in 16 years. It may be the promising moment in American history in our whole lifetimes because of all the changes that are happening politically, economically, and it may be that our nation will have woken up from 40 years of free market ideology raging without caring for people. And so there are some things that we learned in the lessons of the 90s about our fight against AIDS. The strongest weapon that we have in the fight against AIDS is each other. That's everybody in this room and everybody that you know and love that are affected by this epidemic. It came out of a mass movement of the people. As the president-elect said, change comes from below, not from above. And the AIDS activists changed America, history, and research from below. And we are the legacy, along with many, many thousands of other activists around the world, of that change. But what are the other 3 things that people can get by working together? One is that we change by focusing on the science. Science is incredibly powerful, and all of the tools that we have now that we use to fight against AIDS were discovered by science. And it was because of activism that science happened faster and better than it would have otherwise. And what are the other 2 things? The other 2 things are power and money. And so what we can do by all working together is the support that you give us enables TAG to use a very small number of people to leverage huge organizations all around the world, whether it's the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, TB and Malaria, the National Institutes of Health, the White House, the drug industry. But with 10 people, we can leverage the world with the support that you give us. And the challenges that we face now are greater than ever. People like to talk about how great the tools that we have against AIDS are and what a miracle it is that we have HEART and all that stuff. And I here am alive because of those things. Those tools are amazing, but they are so far from where we need to be. And we are so wrong if we get into complacency and say it's okay to say that people should just be on lifelong therapy for 30 years and that it's going to be feasible to do that for the indefinite future. We need to discover a vaccine. We need to discover a cure. And the cure fell off the agenda for 14 years since HEART was discovered. And it was only this year in fall that TAG, working together with AMFAR and Project Inform, put together the first ever scientific workshop on how to discover a cure for HIV and what were the obstacles in terms of getting it, viral latency, and persistence. And you can see some of the pictures from that. I'd like to make a special thanks to Joy Episala and David Siegel, who did this incredible video that shows you, rather than tells you what TAG did. You might notice that in it there's a tribute to one of our longest and most loyal donors, Paul Newman, who unfortunately passed away this year, but he himself showed how one man can help millions of people save their lives. And then I also want to mention, before I introduce Mark Dybul, who wasn't able to make it because he had to go to a meeting at the White House, one last screw up by the current administration. Sally means something really special to me and to TAG, and the presence of Sally and Toby tonight means something really, really special. And Sally's husband, many of you know Sally's husband, Paul, who worked at AMFAR and was an activist, was a science-based activist, and worked from within that organization to do a lot of cutting-edge work in the 90s. And they had a benefit for us once, and we were asking them, like, why did they want to support TAG? And Paul turned to Sally and he was like, I just think what they do is really cool. I wish if I had another life, I'd be one of those tag boys. And now we're luckily men and women, not just boys. But Paul was really an amazing activist. And Sally is an amazing activist. And when she was on our board in memory of Paul's legacy, she brought us to a new place. The place that she brought us is right here, right now, where we are tonight. And her beautiful son, Toby, who's also a living legacy of that beautiful marriage that they have. I just want to thank you from all my heart, Sally and Toby, for being here tonight. And also, I want to thank Paul, even though he's not here. So now we're going to move to our first honoree, who's actually not here. He's Dr. Mark Dybul. He's the ambassador for global AIDS of in the Office of Global AIDS Coordination in the State Department. And he is a physician. He's an openly gay man. He's one of the few openly gay men who brought his partner to the White House Christmas party for the last few years. He used to work with Tony Fauci at the NIH in the late 90s. That's when we got to know him. He worked on research on structured treatment interruptions. He was the executive secretary of the federal guidelines panel. And then when the president announced that he wanted to do a large global AIDS program at the start of the Iraq War, Tony Fauci and Mark Dybul were the ones who wrote the outline for what became PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. So Mark truly took the philosophy of taking research expertise and putting it into action. And as a result of this incredible US program, which is strongly supported by both parties, it's the largest single program for any disease in the history of the human race. And as a result of it, more than 2 million people are alive that wouldn't be alive otherwise. And so we're honoring Mark because of the work that he did in spite of the very difficult political conditions under the last 8 years. He was able to do something amazing and to build PEPFAR into a life-sustaining program for millions around the world. He wasn't able to be here because he has to go to the White House and then go to Geneva tomorrow. But he did send a message. Enjoy. This is the part where I'm supposed to push a button, but the screen is off. So. Watch out. Right. So here's Mark.
Good evening, everyone. I deeply regret I'm not able to be with you this evening because of my responsibilities here in Washington. I'm sure it's a lot more fun where you are in New York with famous actors and interesting people than being in a recording studio in the bowels of the State Department. So I can tell you I deeply regret not being with you. It's very humbling to be among the awardees tonight, and I deeply thank TAG and my good friend Mark Harrington for giving me the honor of joining these distinguished people, and for giving me the honor of being with all of you tonight, even remotely. TAG has done extraordinary work, and my good friend Mark Harrington has been a great inspiration and leader in the fight against HIV/AIDS, as have so many of you here tonight. And so I actually would like to honor you. Where we are today, compared to 25 years ago when I was a young medical student, is breathtaking. You know, when I was a young man, and many of you were in this as well, in New York and around the country, as a medical student and resident, doctors and nurses wouldn't touch HIV-positive patients. We watched so many 17-year-old young men die, often alone, because their families wouldn't be with them. Their friends and families had abandoned them because of the stigma of HIV/AIDS. And worse than that, we didn't have any hope or future to turn it around, to change the death that was being wrought by this disease. But with TAG and people like Mark and so many of you in the room, people who fought for the dignity and worth of every human life, who said that this was not acceptable, who also took a step further to say it's not acceptable even if we can defeat the stigma, to simply watch people die. That with technology, with research, we could change everything. And that's what you've done. And so over the last 25 years, as we sit here today, we can celebrate life, particularly in the United States and in America and in Europe, where so much has changed because of the leadership, because of the deep commitment to the dignity and worth of every human life, and because of the deep commitment to the promise, the opportunity of research, and applying that type of new era of research back to people to restore dignity to them. But just 5 years ago, we were in the exact same place in sub-Saharan Africa. So many were dying, so many were needlessly dying. But we could stand on the shoulders of Tag and Mark, and so many of you in the room, as the President announced the Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, the largest international health initiative in history for a single disease. That's a rather remarkable statement. And it was dedicated to HIV/AIDS because of the work of so many of you that led up to it. And it had those same principles that Tag and Mark and all of you have lived by. The promise and dignity or worth of every human life, no matter where they are, and that if we had research, if we had technology that could save these lives, we had the moral responsibility to act. And it was those two principles that so many of you pushed for 25 years ago, that led to the largest initiative in history for a single disease. And that allowed us to set bold and aggressive goals to go from 50,000 people in sub-Saharan Africa in treatment to 2 million people in treatment. And the effect there has been like it has been in the United States. Restorative, creating hope. You know, when we started this initiative, there was a hospice in South Africa. Every World AIDS Day, they had an event to memorialize, as so many of us had for so many years, all of those who died in the previous year. In 2004, when the emergency plan began, that hospice provided antiretroviral therapy and everyone was alive. And so rather than having a memorial service, they had a celebration of life. And so this World AIDS Day, just a couple of weeks ago, with a red ribbon over the north portico of the White House, which had been there the year before as well, first time ever, with the President and First Lady of the United States standing before it, talking about the importance of the U.S. to be involved, not only here at home, but abroad in the fight against HIV/AIDS, with those principles of dignity and worth of every human life, and the promise of research for now and for the future. So tonight, just like on World AIDS Day, we should celebrate life. But we also have to look to the future, because we're not there yet. We have a long way to go. And those principles, dignity and worth of every human life, and the promise of research to take us even further, with vaccines, microbicides, male circumcision, the ability perhaps to use treatment in novel ways for prevention, and things we cannot conceive of today, but will be with us in years to come. That advocacy, that push, that strong support to move this to the next level again, as we did and you did 25 years ago, has to be with us. So tonight is to party, tonight is to have fun, tonight is to celebrate life. But tomorrow when we all wake up, it's to go back to what you and we have been doing every day for the last 20 years. To push for the next step, to push for the dignity and worth of every human life, and to push for the opportunity and promise of research to change the world. Because if we all work together, that is what we will continue to do. Nothing short of change the world. Thank you again. Thank you in particular to Tag and to Mark. Thank you to all of you for what you've done for so many years, and let's keep doing it together. Good night.
Thank you. And now to introduce our next honoree is Malcolm.